It's a warm summer evening on a lonely highway. A car cruises along, headlights cutting through the dusk. Years ago, the driver's windshield would have been spattered with the remains of dozens of insects by the end of the trip. Today, however, that glass stays eerily clean. The near absence of smashed bugs on the windshield is perplexing, even unsettling. There's a mystery unfolding on our roads, a silent disappearance that's been dubbed the windshield phenomenon. The windshield phenomenon is the observation that far fewer bugs end up squashed on car windshields today than in decades past. Many drivers have noticed that after a long drive, they no longer need to scrub their windshield clean of dead insects the way they once did. Essentially, this case of the missing splats suggests something has changed in the environment, and not in a small way. Older drivers even recall summer nights when so many moths swarmed their headlights it looked like a blizzard. This spectacle, nicknamed the moth snowstorm, has now largely vanished from memory. For years, the windshield phenomenon remained a curious anecdote. Some experts urged caution, noting that windshields might not be a scientific gauge of insect populations. Yet the reports of empty windshields kept coming. Entomologists themselves admitted they were cleaning their cars far less often than before. By 2017, the anecdote had turned into alarm. Major media outlets worldwide ran stories about drastic insect declines over the past few decades. The windshield phenomenon was no longer just small talk. It was evidence in an unfolding environmental mystery. This was a turning point. What had started as casual chatter was now front-page news and a cause for very serious concern. In Germany, one scientist went so far as to warn that we were on course for an ecological Armageddon as insect ecosystems quietly collapsed. People everywhere began to ask with growing urgency, where have all the insects gone? Anecdotes alone don't prove a case, but now hard data confirms the windshield phenomenon is indeed real. In Denmark, a 20-year survey counting bugs splattered on car windshields found an 80% decline in insect hits between 1997 and 2017. In the United Kingdom, concern about disappearing insects led to a massive citizen science experiment. In 2004, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds recruited 40,000 motorists to count how many bugs hit a small grid on their car's license plate during their drives. The result was about one squashed insect every 8 kilometers of driving. When wildlife groups repeated this experiment in 2019, they found about 50% fewer bug splats than in 2004, and by 2021, a survey in one region showed roughly a 70% drop. These consistent results across different countries all tell the same story. Insect life has plummeted, and it's not just our imagination. To rule out alternative explanations, scientists even checked whether modern aerodynamic cars simply kill fewer insects than older, boxier models. The answer was no. Modern cars actually hit slightly more insects in tests, so car design isn't the reason for the disappearing splats. The decline is genuine, and the scale of it is alarming. Losing 50 to 80% of insects in just a few decades is like an ecological nightmare unfolding in the blink of an eye. In fact, the windshield findings align with a wave of other research showing steep insect losses in many regions. For example, a long-term study in German nature reserves documented about a 75% loss in flying insect biomass over 26 years. Some experts are calling this trend an insect apocalypse, an existential threat to ecosystems across the globe. Research into insect declines points to a combination of interlocking factors. Human expansion and intensive agriculture have drastically reduced or altered the habitats where insects once thrived. Wild meadows, forests, and wetlands have been cleared or broken into isolated patches, leaving many insects with nowhere to live or breed. Since World War II, industrial farming has poured a vast tide of insect-killing chemicals onto the land. These pesticides and other pollutants don't discriminate. They often kill beneficial insects along with pests, contributing hugely to the overall decline of insect populations. Shifting climate patterns are disrupting insect life cycles. Warmer temperatures and altered rainfall can throw off the timing of flowering and breeding, and extreme weather events can wipe out local insect colonies. The spread of artificial light at night is another factor harming insects. Many insects are drawn to or disoriented by bright lights, which interferes with their feeding and reproduction. Notably, light pollution has been cited as a key factor in the quote-unquote insect apocalypse by entomologists studying nocturnal insect losses. Each of these forces likely plays a part, and together they create a perfect storm for insect life. Researchers have noted it's probably a mix of a variety of factors driving the decline. Regardless, though, the end result is exactly what we see on our windshields: far fewer bugs in the air than there used to be. It might be a relief to have a cleaner windshield, but the disappearance of bugs should worry us. Insects aren't just pests to be swatted. They're pillars of ecosystems and providers of services that humans depend on. For example, roughly 3/4 of our crop types rely on insects, like bees, butterflies, and other pollinators, to reproduce. If those pollinators vanish, many fruits, vegetables, and nuts would become scarce, threatening our food supply and economies. Insects also happen to be the most numerous animals on the planet by far. They make up as much as 90% of all animal species on Earth. In other words, they're the foundation of the animal kingdom's diversity. Not surprisingly then, insects are the base of countless food webs. Those squashed bugs on the windshield would have been meals for birds, bats, frogs, and other creatures. Areas suffering big insect losses are already seeing declines in insect-eating birds and other wildlife. If the all-you-can-eat buffet disappears, larger animals that rely on it will struggle to survive, and whole ecosystems could unravel around them. Scientists warn that continuing insect declines could even trigger a collapse of nature's ecosystems on a catastrophic scale. In short, losing insects would send shockwaves through both the environment and human society alike. In 1970, a Harvard scientist believed he had witnessed a superhuman feat of memory. A student known as Elizabeth stared at a random pattern of 10,000 dots with one eye, and the next day looked at a second pattern of 10,000 dots with her other eye. Incredibly, her mind fused the two images into a single picture, as if she had taken a mental photograph of the first pattern and stored it overnight. This startling result offered a tantalizing glimpse of the concept known as photographic memory. Yet Elizabeth never underwent further tests, and somewhat bizarrely, she married the researcher and slipped out of the spotlight. This left behind a burning question: was her ability real, or just an illusion? Eidetic memory is the ability to vividly recall an image for a brief time after seeing it, almost as if the image were still present. A very small percentage of young children show this ability, describing pictures in detail from memory for a few minutes before it fades. In adults, however, true eidetic imagery is virtually non-existent. One theory suggests that as we develop language and abstract thinking, we lose the raw visual snapshot ability we had as children. However, the popular notion of photographic memory goes beyond eidetic images. It implies permanent and exact recall of visual information, but experts say there's no proof that anyone actually possesses such unlimited visual memory. Scientists have long been skeptical that photographic memory exists. Aside from the Elizabeth story, no scientific study has ever verified a person with long-term photographic recall. Her case was never independently replicated, and after the 1970 publication, Elizabeth refused further testing and married the researcher, which feels like some sort of ethical breach. This very unusual relationship between the researcher and the subject strongly suggested to some scientists that the original researcher was trying to rizz up Lizzie by making her feel unique. Nevertheless, legends of photographic recall persist. For instance, it's said that mathematician John von Neumann could recite entire books from memory, and similar claims have been made about other prodigies. These anecdotes are hard to verify, and even if true, they likely reflect exceptional learning techniques or intense focus, rather than a literal camera-like memory. For instance, individuals are able to memorize and recite very lengthy religious texts from memory without error due to intensive focus, devotion, and repetition. Overall, research shows that human memory doesn't work like a recording device. It's an active, reconstructive process where we assemble pieces of information rather than play back an exact copy. In experiments, even people with excellent memories can't recall a complex image with perfect fidelity once it's out of sight. That said, these people can recognize images they saw before among thousands of new ones with around 80% accuracy. But recognition is much easier than free recall. In fact, scientists believe our brains would likely need a completely different architecture to store exact snapshots of every scene. Some individuals do have astonishing memory abilities, just not the unlimited photographic kind. A handful of people have highly superior autobiographical memory, meaning they can recall almost every day of their lives in vivid detail. A famous case is Jill Price, who can tell you what she was doing on a given date years ago, even describing minor events and the day's weather. Yet even she doesn't have a crystal clear snapshot of every scene, and her gift is limited to personal memories. And she still forgets plenty of information outside her own life story. And I use the term gift here in quite a loose sense, since the idea of being able to remember every moment of your life basically sounds like hell. There are also memory champions who perform jaw-dropping feats like memorizing dozens of decks of cards in minutes. However, they achieve this through practice and clever strategies, not an inherent photographic memory. These mental athletes train to encode information using vivid imagery and patterns, rather than instantly absorbing scenes at a glance. In rare cases of savant syndrome, some people exhibit extraordinary memory in specific areas. For instance, British artist Stephen Wiltshire can draw entire city skylines from memory after a short helicopter ride. These abilities are incredible, but even savants are not photographic in the broad sense. Stephen Wiltshire's memories, for instance, are highly specialized. Despite the lack of hard evidence, the idea of photographic memory refuses to die. It remains a staple of fictional geniuses, something that's attributed to real geniuses, and a topic of fascination for the public. In the end, photographic memories likely don't exist, and the idea as scientific reality likely stems from a very unusual relationship between a researcher and his subject. Imagine standing on a featureless expanse of ice, the wind a physical force that steals both warmth and reason. Or perhaps you're alone in the cockpit of a small plane, the drone of the engine a hypnotic lullaby pulling you toward a fatal sleep over a black ocean. Maybe you're in the choking dust of a collapsed building, the weight of the world above you, hope dwindling with each shallow breath. In these moments, at the absolute precipice of human endurance, when the body has exhausted its reserves and the mind begins to fray, something extraordinary can happen. The crushing solitude evaporates, replaced by a sudden, inexplicable, and certain feeling. You are not alone. This is the core mystery of the third man factor, a phenomenon also known as the sensed presence. It's a recurring report from individuals pushed to the very edge of survival, describing an incorporeal but vividly felt companion. This unseen entity is always benevolent, offering comfort, providing clear-headed guidance, and instilling a profound sense of hope. Many spiritual people, or even people who have no spiritual inklings whatsoever, describe the experience as if they are communing with a higher power. The third man factor, far from being a mere story, represents a profound intersection of neurology, psychology, and the innate human drive to survive. The genesis of our modern understanding of the third man factor begins in the desolation of the Antarctic, amidst one of history's greatest tales of survival. In May 1916, Sir Ernest Shackleton, commander of the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, faced a final desperate gamble. His ship, the Endurance, had been trapped and ultimately crushed by pack ice, stranding his crew for over a year. After a perilous open-boat journey, Shackleton and two of his toughest men, Frank Worsley and Tom Crean, landed on the coast of South Georgia Island. The whaling station that represented their only hope of rescue lay on the opposite side, across an uncharted and forbidding spine of mountains and glaciers. What followed was an epic feat of endurance, a non-stop 36-hour march across this treacherous terrain. The men were at the absolute limit of their physical and mental strength, suffering from exhaustion, dehydration, and the constant threat of the elements. They possessed no tent, no sleeping bags, and their only equipment consisted of a few pieces of rope and some climbing picks. They were three men, alone against an entire continent, or so they thought. During that grueling trek, each of the three men experienced a strange and powerful sensation. As Shackleton later recounted in his 1919 book, they began to feel the presence of a fourth individual with them. This wasn't a fleeting delusion, but a persistent feeling of a companion walking alongside them, a silent, supportive presence. Crucially, none of them spoke of it at the time, each man keeping the inexplicable experience to himself, focusing only on the task at hand. It was only weeks later, after their miraculous arrival at the whaling station, that the shared nature of their experience came to light. Shackleton's Antarctic apparition wasn't an isolated anomaly. It was merely the first widely publicized account of a phenomenon that appears to be a universal feature of the human experience under duress. Notably, the high-altitude world of mountaineering is a fertile ground for the third man phenomenon, and this is actually how I originally found out about it. The combination of hypoxia, extreme cold, fatigue, and isolation creates a perfect storm of physiological and psychological stress. One of the most compelling accounts comes from Reinhold Messner, arguably the greatest mountaineer in history. During a desperate descent of Dimer Mountain in the Himalayas, Messner became acutely aware of a third climber accompanying him and his partner. He couldn't see the figure directly, but he felt its presence with absolute certainty, just out of his field of vision, keeping pace with them on the treacherous slope. Similarly, in his book Touching the Void, climber Joe Simpson recounts his near-fatal experience in the Peruvian Andes. After shattering his leg and falling into a deep pit, he was left to perish. During his impossible, agonizing crawl back to base camp, he was guided and relentlessly encouraged by an internal voice. This voice was distinct from his own thoughts, providing clear, pragmatic instructions and pushing him to continue when every instinct screamed for him to give up. The phenomenon isn't limited to the world's highest peaks or frozen wastelands. The sensory monotony and profound isolation of long-distance solo travel can also conjure the unseen companion. In 1927, during his historic 34-hour nonstop flight across the Atlantic, Charles Lindbergh battled overwhelming fatigue. In the cramped cockpit of the Spirit of St. Louis, he reported the presence of translucent, friendly beings who spoke with him, discussed navigation, and offered reassurance. And yeah, I'm just going to say that we could all use some of those crazy entities in our life. While the stories are compelling, they beg the fundamental question about what this phenomenon actually is. Perhaps the simplest answer is that it's a spiritual entity sent to assist an individual under duress. From a neurological perspective, scientists have speculated that this is essentially a glitch in the brain brought on by extreme duress. Psychologists, on the other hand, note that it seems to serve an adaptive function while in those extreme situations, and speculate that the brain invents an imaginary friend. These theories have little to back them up, and are in essence really just preliminary hypotheses. After all, it's hard to replicate the circumstances that make the third man phenomenon appear under laboratory settings, for obvious ethical reasons. However, perhaps the most persistent and challenging aspect for any purely mechanistic explanation is the overwhelmingly helpful and benevolent nature of the presence. Neither scientific theory fully accounts for why this internally generated entity is always a force for good. Simply put, there's no stories like this of the stressed-out brain conjuring a malevolent demon wishing for someone's demise. The third man present in these extreme survival situations is a consistent ally that's found across cultures and time. This points toward a deeply embedded pro-survival bias in the very fabric of the mechanism, a feature that continues to elude a complete scientific explanation. In the vast, sun-scorched expanse of Nevada's Mojave Desert, within the Ash Meadows National Wildlife Refuge, there's a small, fenced-off patch of rock. To the casual observer, it looks like little more than a crack in the earth. But this unassuming fissure is a portal to another world. It's the entrance to Devil's Hole, a water-filled limestone cavern of unmapped depths. This is a geothermal window into a vast subterranean aquifer where water that fell as rain or snow thousands of years ago finally returns to the light. The water is a constant, bath-like 93 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's home to what is arguably the rarest, most geographically isolated fish on the entire planet, the Devil's Hole pupfish. This tiny creature, whose entire existence plays out in this single watery cavern, raises the compelling mystery of how it even got there and how it continues to survive. The Devil's Hole pupfish is a marvel of evolutionary tenacity packed into a tiny and extremely inbred frame. Rarely growing more than an inch long, the males are a startling iridescent blue, flashing like scattered jewels in the cavern's twilight. The females and juveniles are a more subdued yellowish brown. They get their name from the playful, darting way they move, reminiscent of frolicking puppies. Their entire world is a shallow, submerged limestone shelf, measuring just 215 square feet, upon which the whole species depends for feeding and spawning. This ledge is their continent, their ocean, their absolutely everything. Life on this shelf is lived at the absolute edge of biological possibility. The water's constant 93 degrees Fahrenheit temperature is paired with critically low dissolved oxygen levels, hovering around 2.5 milligrams per liter. This is a combination that would be lethal to most fish, but the pupfish soldiers on. Their diet is meager, consisting of algae, diatoms, and the few tiny invertebrates like snails and beetles that can survive there. This food source dwindles dramatically during the winter months when direct sunlight no longer reaches the water's surface to fuel algal growth. This forces the fish to endure a period of near starvation, and with a rapid life cycle of only 10 to 14 months, every generation faces the same precarious struggle. The story for most other pupfish species in the American Southwest is a relatively straightforward one. During the Pleistocene epoch, a much wetter period, vast lakes and interconnected rivers covered the landscape. As the last ice age ended and the climate grew hotter and drier around 10,000 years ago, these massive bodies of water evaporated, leaving behind small, isolated springs and pools. Fish populations that were once connected became stranded in these aquatic islands, and over millennia, they evolved into the distinct species we see today. For decades, scientists assumed the Devil's Hole pupfish was the ultimate example of this process, a species isolated for 10,000 to 20,000 years in its cavernous refuge. But there's a critical flaw in that narrative. Geological and hydrological studies have revealed that Devil's Hole is fundamentally different. It's not the remnant of a surface lake. It's a deep tectonic fault, a fissure that opened to the surface roughly 60,000 years ago. Crucially, there's no evidence that it was ever connected by surface water to the ancient lakes or the other springs in the area. It is fed from below by a massive regional aquifer, but it has always been a geological island. If the fish weren't simply left behind when the waters receded, they must have arrived by some other means. The question isn't just when they got there, but how these fish out of water crossed hot, dry land. This geological reality has ignited a fierce scientific debate, fueled by the disruptive power of modern genetics. The first major challenge came from population viability models and genetic analyses. This suggested a tiny population, which has likely never exceeded 550 individuals, couldn't have survived the effects of inbreeding for 10,000 years or more. Some of these groundbreaking studies proposed a shocking alternative. The pupfish may have colonized Devil's Hole very recently. Interestingly, some estimates place their arrival at as little as about 100 years ago. This theory suggests that the pupfish's unique physical traits might not be the product of long, slow evolution, but rather a rapid developmental response to the extreme environment. However, the debate is far from settled. Other high-resolution genomic studies have swung the pendulum in the opposite direction, arguing for a much more ancient origin. This research suggests the pupfish may have diverged from its relatives around 60,000 years ago, nearly the same time that the cavern itself is thought to have opened to the surface. This hypothesis proposes that the geological event that created the habitat and the biological event of the fish's arrival might be linked. The reason for these wildly different estimates comes down to a fundamental uncertainty in genetics: the mutation rate or the speed of the molecular clock. The pupfish's extreme environment, high metabolism, and chronically small population size likely cause its genes to mutate much faster than those of a typical vertebrate. But no one knows the exact rate. Using a standard rate results in an ancient timeline, while using a faster rate points to a very recent arrival. Until the true rate can be measured, the exact age of the Devil's Hole pupfish remains an educated guess, suspended between a few centuries and tens of millennia. If the pupfish are indeed recent arrivals, it forces us to consider seemingly impossible journeys. The leading hypothesis for recent arrival is human introduction. Native Americans in the region were known to utilize pupfish as a food source, and it's plausible that they transported them to Devil's Hole. Scientists who have proposed this theory believe they may have stocked this area with the fish intentionally to establish a new food supply on an ancient trade route. If they were ancient arrivals, one possibility is that they were transported by birds. Their sticky, millimeter-sized fish eggs could have hitched a ride on the feathers or feet of waterfowl traveling between isolated oases. Whether it's an ancient survivor that has defied the laws of population genetics for millennia, or a recent colonist that arrived by improbable means, remains unknown. Interestingly, recent genomic work has confirmed that the pupfish is one of the most inbred animals on Earth, with 58% of its genome being identical across individuals. This genetic uniformity makes its continued survival all the more remarkable and its future all the more fragile. Imagine you learned that your life, every single moment, from your greatest triumphs to your most mundane days, will happen again and again, exactly the same way, forever. No changes, no edits, just an infinite rerun of everything you have experienced. This mind-bending question might sound like science fiction, but it lies at the heart of a profound philosophical idea. The concept of eternal recurrence proposes that time is not a one-way street, but a circle, that all events may repeat themselves in an endless loop. It's an idea that has captivated thinkers for millennia, with many cultures even symbolizing it through the Ouroboros, a snake swallowing its tail, as a sign of eternal cycles. The notion that time could be cyclical has deep roots in human thought. Indeed, long before modern storytellers toyed with time loops, ancient philosophers and religious traditions imagined the universe as an endless cycle. For example, Pythagorean thinkers in ancient Greece believed in the transmigration of souls, a form of reincarnation where souls are reborn over and over in different bodies. In Eastern philosophies like Buddhism, the wheel of time turns endlessly. The cosmos undergoes infinite cycles of creation and destruction, and living beings are caught in samsara, the repeating cycle of birth and rebirth. Even outside of spiritual contexts, early Greek thinkers noted circular patterns in nature and history. Aristotle described time itself as a circle, with seasons repeated in a reassuring rhythm year after year. Greek philosophers like Empedocles even imagined cosmic history as an endless cycle of elemental forces coming together and breaking apart, only to repeat forever. These ideas were, in essence, borrowing the idea that seasonality also applies to the entirety of the cosmic order itself. One school that took the idea of cosmic repetition seriously was the Stoics of ancient Greece and Rome. The Stoic philosophers proposed that the universe unfolds in recurring epochs. Some Stoics even went so far as to argue that in each new cycle, everything repeats exactly in the same sequence. Such cyclical ideas stood in stark contrast to the later linear view of time promoted by Christianity, which saw history as a one-way journey with a clear beginning and end. As the influence of Christianity grew, these ancient notions of eternal cycles became less prominent in Western thought. However, the fascination with cosmic loops never completely disappeared. Even modern cosmologists explored the idea that the universe might undergo endless cycles of big bangs and big crunches. This hypothesis remains unproven, but it shows how strongly the idea of recurrence grips the imagination. In the 19th century, Friedrich Nietzsche famously revived the concept of eternal recurrence as a provocative thought experiment rather than a scientific theory. It was a daring move in an intellectual climate that assumed history was linear, unrepeatable, and always destined towards upward progress. Nietzsche asked the reader to imagine a striking scenario. A demon suddenly whispers that your life, exactly as you have lived it, will repeat itself innumerable times. Every joy and every sorrow, every trivial moment and every great triumph will recur again and again on the eternal carousel of existence. Nietzsche suggests two extreme reactions to this pronouncement. One is despair. You might curse the messenger and tremble at the idea of reliving every pain and regret endlessly. The other is delight. You might welcome the news, even proclaim you've never heard anything more divine. He didn't intend this morbid scenario as a literal description of the cosmos, but as a challenge to our attitude toward life. It forces each of us to ask, do I love my life enough that I would want to live it again, exactly the same? Nietzsche's aim was to provoke a life-affirming mindset. He wanted people to confront this hypothetical eternal return and respond with a resounding yes to life. To embrace eternal recurrence, then, means to embrace life so completely that even its hardships and sorrows are welcomed as part of the whole. Nietzsche argued joy came from being someone who could accept the prospect of living his or her same life on repeat and still rejoice in it. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the prophet Zarathustra eventually calls eternal recurrence a joyous truth, framing it as the ultimate test of saying yes to existence. Nietzsche even saw this idea as a counterpoint to religious hopes of an afterlife. Instead of longing for paradise in another realm, eternal recurrence offers a kind of immortality in this world, repeating forever. So we must learn to value this life fully. However, it's noteworthy that Nietzsche never outright claimed eternal recurrence was scientifically true. In private notes, he wondered about it, but in his published work, he treated it as a thought experiment and metaphor. The power of the idea is therefore psychological rather than physical. From a scientific perspective, eternal recurrence takes on a different flavor than in philosophy. If time and space are infinite, then the number of possible arrangements of matter is finite. Because even though the universe is vast, the laws of physics limit how particles can be organized. Over an infinite stretch of time, every possible configuration would eventually repeat. This is sometimes framed in terms of the Poincaré recurrence theorem, which states that under certain conditions, a system will eventually return to its original state. Cosmologists have extended this reasoning to the universe itself. If it's boundless and eternal, then the histories we experience could recur countless times. Some models of a cyclical cosmos suggest that universes are born, collapse, and are reborn endlessly, making repetition inevitable. In a more statistical sense, if there are infinitely many universes in a multiverse, then there are infinitely many versions of you living out the same life. Here, eternal recurrence isn't a mystical fate, but a logical outcome of infinite possibilities, playing out an infinite amount of times. It implies that our existence isn't unique, but one of endless reruns written into the mathematics of infinity. And again, much like Nietzsche's thought experiment, it suggests that we ought to live our best life, because it's the only life we have. In the end, if one accepts this theory, we can be cursed or blessed to live the one life we're forced to live an infinite amount of times. Picture yourself alone in a room. Suddenly you feel a hand on your face. It's stroking your forehead, then scratching you. You look around, and the hand is your own. You try to pull it away, but it resists. A few hours later, it grabs your throat. Your left hand is trying to strangle you, and you need to fight it off with your right hand. This isn't a scene from a horror flick. It's the lived reality for individuals with alien hand syndrome, one of the most unsettling conditions in all of neurology. It's a rare disorder where a part of your own body ceases to be your own, becoming a terrifying autonomous agent, acting with a will of its own. What defines this bizarre condition is a profound and terrifying loss of control. Alien hand syndrome is a neurological disorder in which a person's limb, usually a hand, performs complex, goal-directed actions on their own. In essence, it's like an intrusive thought, but for your limbs rather than your brain. The key features that separate it from other movement disorders are twofold. First, the movements are sophisticated and purposeful, like unbuttoning a shirt, grabbing objects, or even something more sinister. Second, the patient experiences a deep sense of psychological estrangement from the limb, feeling that it is foreign or controlled by an external force. The root cause of alien hand syndrome is always some form of brain damage that disrupts the intricate network of volitional motor control. In a healthy brain, the simple decision to move an arm activates vast, coordinated networks of neurons. In a person with the syndrome, functional brain scans show that this activation is strangely isolated, occurring in specific motor areas without the usual monitoring activity from other regions. This points to a disconnection syndrome, where critical brain regions can no longer communicate effectively, leading to a kind of conflict between intention and action. The damage typically occurs in one of three key areas. The first is the corpus callosum, the massive bundle of nerve fibers that acts as a bridge between the brain's left and right hemispheres. The second is the frontal lobe, which is essential for planning, decision-making, and initiating voluntary movements. The third is the parietal lobe, responsible for integrating sensory information and creating our internal map of our body and space. Damage to these communication hubs reveals a profound truth. Our sense of being a single, unified agent isn't a given. It's an emergent property, a fragile harmony created by the constant, high-speed dialogue between different parts of the brain. When that dialogue is severed, the self can fracture. This neurological damage gives rise to distinct clinical variations of the syndrome, each linked to the specific location of the brain damage. The frontal variant is often characterized by compulsive and impulsive actions of the dominant hand. The hand might involuntarily grope for nearby objects or reflexively grasp tools, with the person finding it incredibly difficult to let go. In this form, patients are typically aware that the rogue limb is their own, but they feel powerless to inhibit its impulsive actions. The callosal variant is the classic presentation of conflict, where the two hands seem to be acting opposed to one another. This typically affects the non-dominant hand and is a direct result of damage to the corpus callosum, severing the communication lines between the two hemispheres. Perhaps the most bizarre form is the posterior variant. This type is linked to damage in the parietal lobe and is characterized by strange, levitating movements of the arm and a profound denial of ownership of the limb. The movements are often less purposeful, more like aimless waving or posturing. One study documented a 77-year-old woman experienced this after strokes in both parietal lobes, watching in terror as her left hand began stroking her face and hair of its own accord. Within the scientific literature, there's a subtle but important distinction that often gets lost in popular explanations of the syndrome. An anarchic hand describes a limb that performs unintended, goal-directed movements, but the patient never denies that the hand is their own. They experience a loss of agency, the feeling of being in control, but not a loss of ownership. They might be frustrated and believe their hand won't listen, but they recognize the hand as part of their body. A true alien hand, by contrast, involves the core feeling of non-belonging. Here the patient experiences a loss of ownership, feeling the limb is foreign or attached to them by mistake. For people living this syndrome, they come to believe that the limb itself is essentially a foreign object grafted onto their body. Living with this internal stranger is a daily struggle that is frustrating, frightening, and deeply isolating. Patients report high levels of anxiety, depression, and paranoia as they can no longer trust a part of their own body. At present, further research on alien hand syndrome is needed to clarify its underlying neural mechanisms and improve treatment. Although current evidence links the syndrome to lesions in the corpus callosum, frontal, or parietal lobes, the precise pathways responsible remain poorly understood. Essentially, at present, scientists have discovered the why of this medical mystery, but not the how. Close your eyes for a moment and listen. Not to the world you know, but to a world that's been silent for over 300 years. Imagine the sound of the island of Mauritius before humans. It's a symphony of buzzing insects. the rustle of giant tortoises through dense undergrowth, the calls of brightly colored parrots in trees. There's one very unusual noise, though, the pigeon-like coo of a large flightless bird, foraging for fallen fruit on the forest floor. This was the world of the dodo, an ecosystem that evolved in splendid isolation for millions of years. Now, listen again. That symphony is gone. In its place is a profound silence, a quiet defined by the absence of its most famous resident. The story of the dodo isn't the simple fable you might remember from childhood, the tale of a stupid bird that was too clumsy to survive. It's a far more complex and tragic story of a creature perfectly adapted to one world and catastrophically unprepared for the new one that arrived. Mauritius is a volcanic island, a lonely peak thrust up from the floor of the Indian Ocean, never connected to any mainland. This isolation was the master architect of its unique ecology. Before human settlement, it was a paradise cloaked in a mosaic of forests, from dry coastal woods to misty upland cloud forests, interspersed with palm-rich savannas. The most crucial feature of this world was what it lacked: terrestrial mammalian predators. With no large carnivores stalking the forest floor, the island's fauna evolved along a different path. Giant tortoises and skinks roamed freely, and the only native mammals were friendly bats that had made the perilous journey over the ocean there. In this sanctuary, the dodo's ancestors, pigeons that likely arrived from Southeast Asia millions of years ago, found an environment where their old adaptations were no longer necessary. Flying is an incredibly energy-intensive activity, a biological luxury maintained for escaping predators or finding scarce food. On Mauritius, food was abundant on the ground, and there was nothing to escape from ever. So, over countless generations, the dodo's ancestors traded the sky for the ground. Their wings shrank, their bodies grew larger and more robust. Similarly, their reproductive strategy adapted to this life of safety. With no predators to raid their nests, female dodos laid only a single, large egg at a time. This allowed them to invest all their energy into one promising offspring, rather than simply blasting out as many eggs as possible and hoping one chick survives. The traits that would later be seen as flaws, flightlessness, largeness, and a low birth rate, weren't flaws at all. They were the pinnacle of evolutionary success in the peaceful world the dodo had always known. You might not like it, but this is what peak bird physiology looks like. The popular image of the dodo is a caricature, a comically fat, clumsy, and dim-witted bird. This picture, largely shaped by 17th century European artists like Roland Savory, painting overfed captive specimens, is almost entirely wrong. And in case you're one of those people who just listens, now would be the time to look. I'm sure this painting is familiar to many of you. Modern analysis of the dodo's skeletal structure reveals a bird that wasn't obese but athletic and robust, with strong legs capable of navigating the island's uneven terrain. In the wild, it likely weighed up to 40 pounds and was far leaner than the caricatures suggest. It also stood about 3.5 feet tall and was a powerful ground dweller perfectly suited to its niche. Its mind, too, has been unfairly maligned. The idea of the dumb dodo is likely a myth. For those of you who aren't native English speakers, dumb as a dodo is a fairly common phrase, meaning that someone is, well, exceedingly stupid. In 2016, scientists discovered that its brain-to-body size ratio was on par with that of a modern pigeon, a bird known for its intelligence and trainability. Even more revealing was the structure of its brain. Unlike most birds, which have large optic lobes for keen eyesight, the dodo had an unusually large and well-developed olfactory bulb. This strongly suggests that the dodo navigated its world not primarily by sight, but by smell, sniffing out the fallen fruits, nuts, and roots that made up its diet on the dark forest floor. Yet for all its successful adaptations, its reproductive strategy, that single precious egg laid in a simple nest of grass on the ground, would be its Achilles heel. The end began not with a bang, but with the creak of timber and the splash of an anchor. While Portuguese sailors may have been the first Europeans to glimpse Mauritius around 1507, the pivotal moment came in 1598, with the arrival of Dutch ships. Having evolved for millennia without fear of predators, the dodos were innately trusting and easily approached, making them simple targets for hungry sailors. But the common idea that humans simply hunted the dodo to extinction is too simple. While hunting certainly contributed, several accounts from sailors noted that dodo meat was tough, greasy, and just generally disgusting. The direct human hunt was just the opening act of a much larger ecological tragedy. The true devastation was an invasion, silent and insidious. The Dutch ships brought with them a host of stowaways and livestock that were alien to Mauritius: rats, pigs, dogs, cats, and monkeys. In an environment with no natural predators of their own, these invasive species exploded in number. They were perfectly equipped to exploit the dodo's greatest vulnerability, its single egg, laid defenseless on the forest floor. A single hungry pig could wipe out the reproductive efforts of an entire dodo population far more efficiently than a crew of sailors ever could. This biological assault was compounded by the physical destruction of the dodo's world. The Dutch began systematically felling the island's ancient forests, seeking valuable ebony wood for export to Europe and clearing land for settlements. This habitat destruction fragmented the remaining dodo populations, squeezing them into ever smaller pockets, where they were even more vulnerable to the new predators. Simply put, the dodo faced a three-pronged attack of hunting, invasive predators, and habitat loss that unraveled an ecosystem in less than a century. Pinpointing the exact moment the last dodo perished is a forensic analysis clouded by the fog of history. The last universally accepted sighting of a living dodo was made in 1662 by a shipwrecked Dutch sailor named Volkert Everts. He and his companions found the birds not on the main island, but on a small offshore islet, a telling detail that suggests the species had already been wiped out on the main island. After that, the trail goes cold, complicated by a case of mistaken identity and several later accounts which mention sightings of dodos into the 1670s and 1680s. However, linguistic and historical analysis suggests that as the true dodo disappeared, settlers transferred its familiar name to another flightless bird. This creature, called the red rail, is also now extinct, but without a clear physical description, these later textual references are ambiguous. But notably, modern science and statistical techniques have offered a new tool to peer into the silence and figure out when the dodo went extinct. In 2003, researchers applied a statistical method called optimal linear estimation to the known record of dodo sightings. By analyzing the decreasing frequency of reliable observations, the model calculated the statistical probability of the species' survival over time. The conclusion was that the dodo likely persisted, unseen and dwindling, for another generation after the 1662 encounter, and they arrived at a date of 1690 as most probable. Whatever the case, the last dodo perished alone, a century after its tropical Garden of Eden was shattered. Close your eyes and imagine for a moment that you're a doctor in a field hospital and you've just received a new patient. He's a wounded soldier in extreme agony, but all the supplies of any legitimate painkiller have run out. Desperate to calm him, You inject this wounded soldier with a simple salt solution, assuring the soldier it's actually a potent painkiller. Incredibly, the soldier relaxes as if given real medicine. This famous story, whether fact or legend, illustrates a phenomenon known as the placebo effect, the power of a mere belief or expectation to bring about real relief. Long before scientists studied it, traditional healers of all kinds noticed that faith in a treatment can sometimes heal. As far back as the 16th century, a French physician observed that some people feel better just by the very act of treatment, a phenomenon which would come to be known as the placebo effect. One of the first scientific demonstrations of the placebo effect came in 1799. An English physician named John Haygarth tested a popular quack device of the time called Perkins's metallic tractors, metal rods said to draw out disease. Haygarth suspected the benefit was all in the patient's imagination. He conducted a clever experiment. He treated patients in pain with the expensive metal rods, and others with wooden decoy rods painted to look the same. The patients didn't know which was which, or that they were subject to an experiment, but they did believe that the metallic tractors worked. Remarkably, 4 out of 5 patients reported pain relief with the fake rods, just as often as with the supposed legitimate rods. Haygarth, rather than simply disproving one device, concluded that belief was the true healer. He wrote about this imaginary cure in a publication, planting the seed for the concept of the placebo effect, though he didn't use that term yet. The term placebo in a medical sense gradually entered the lexicon in the 19th and early 20th centuries to mean a non-medically active treatment given for comfort. It wasn't until a 1920 article in The Lancet that the phrase placebo effect was formally introduced as we use it today. But it was Henry K. Beecher, an American anesthesiologist, who truly popularized the concept. In the post-war era, Beecher had seen with his own eyes that belief could act as medicine. Inspired by this, Beecher analyzed many clinical cases and in 1955 published a landmark paper titled The Powerful Placebo. He famously estimated that around 35% of patients in trials improved from just a dummy treatment. This revelation was a wake-up call. It showed how strongly the mind could influence the body. Following Beecher's work, the placebo-controlled trial became the gold standard for medical research. In a typical trial, one group of patients gets the real pill and another group gets a placebo without anyone knowing who got which until the end. This is called the double-blind process, since neither the researchers nor the participants know which is which. If the real treatment doesn't beat the placebo, it's not considered effective. This method revolutionized medicine by ensuring new treatments had to do better than the mind's own healing ability. Yet it also underscored a fascinating reality. Just believing you are being treated can often help. Unraveling the placebo effect mystery has proven extremely challenging. At first glance, it seems almost magical that a sugar pill or a fake procedure could trigger real changes. The exact cause remains a mystery, but there are a number of theories about why it may be the case that the placebo effect actually works. The most common explanation is that if you expect a treatment to help, that expectation alone can launch a healing response. In other words, hope and belief release real forces in the body. For example, when a person believes they've taken a painkiller, their brain can actually release natural pain-relieving chemicals. Studies show that placebo pain relief is associated with the brain pumping out endorphins and activating dopamine, a neurotransmitter linked to reward. The placebo effect can also behave like a Pavlovian response in humans. Over time, we learn to associate the ritual of treatment with getting better. Our bodies can be trained to respond. In one famous example, patients repeatedly given a substance that increases heart rate might later show the same heart rate jump when given just a look-alike placebo pill. In essence, the body has learned the cue and has learned what response is expected. In short, some theorize our physiology can unconsciously remember and replicate the effects of real treatments when given a symbolic substitute. The placebo effect also reveals how tightly the mind and body are woven together. Modern brain imaging studies have captured this in action. When a person experiences placebo pain relief, scans often show increased activity in brain regions that dampen pain signals and process emotions. Interestingly, a 2024 brain scan study of pain in mice found that a placebo didn't shut off the raw pain messages traveling from nerves to the brain. Instead, it changed how the brain interpreted those signals. At present, it's unclear if the same principle applies to human brains as well. Whatever the cause of the placebo effect, the one thing that is clear is that it's a very real scientific mystery that we may solve one day soon. This whale tale begins not in the dim light of a dockside tavern filled with the tall tales of sailors, but in the respected halls of 17th century science. Its protagonist is Sir Robert Sibbald, a man whose credentials lent immediate and formidable weight to his claims. He was a physician, a founder of the Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh, and the first and founding professor of medicine at the University of Edinburgh. He had been appointed Geographer Royal for Scotland, and he was a foundational figure in the Scottish Enlightenment. He was, by the standards of his day, a meticulous observer of the natural world, so much so that he is often regarded as the father of cetology, the study of whales and dolphins. It's this reputation that makes his 1687 account of a strange creature washed ashore so compelling and persistent. In his work Phalainologia Nova, a pioneering text on the whales of Scotland, Sibbald described a female whale that had stranded on the island of Orkney. It was, he reported, a type of sperm whale, but with one astonishing defining feature: an enormous dorsal fin. To convey its scale, he reached for a familiar maritime analogy, describing the fin as being similar to the mizzen mast of a ship. This single evocative phrase is the bedrock of the entire legend. A mizzen mast is the third and shortest mast on a large sailing ship. Yet even so, the comparison suggests a structure of almost unbelievable proportions. Depending on the vessel, such a mast could stand anywhere from 20 to 80 feet tall, implying a fin that would dwarf any known anatomical feature in the animal kingdom. Beyond Sibbald's foundational account, the evidentiary trail for the high-finned whale grows cold with astonishing speed. For a creature with such a dramatic appearance, its appearances in the historical record are remarkably few and far between. The entire case rests on just two primary events, separated by more than 250 years, each plagued by its own significant flaws. The first, Sibbald's 1687 observation, remains the most credible simply due to the reputation of the observer. However, despite being the first person to study whales and dolphins in a true academic sense, it's still a single anecdotal account from over 3 centuries ago. No physical evidence was preserved for future scientific scrutiny. Further, the description of the fin, as noted, was based on a poetic but imprecise metaphor, leaving its true size and shape to the imagination. Sibbald could have simply been using hyperbole to describe the size of the fin, since he very clearly didn't actually say that the fin was the equivalent in height to a mizzen mast. The second major sighting, and the only significant one of the modern era, occurred in September 1946. An unusual creature was reportedly seen trapped for 2 days in the Annapolis Basin of Nova Scotia in Canada. If Sibbald's account was ambiguous, this one was a case study in scientifically useless data. Local observers provided estimates of the animal's length that were wildly inconsistent, ranging from as little as 10 feet to as much as 100 feet. This tenfold variance suggests that no one got a clear, measurable look at the creature. The estimates for the all-important dorsal fin were equally vague and biologically absurd, also ranging between 10 and 100 feet. Despite the animal being confined to a basin for a full 48 hours, no photographs or sketches were taken of the creature. Further, this was a fishing town with whalers. If the whalers in the town truly believed they were seeing a wondrous animal, well, I suspect they may have bagged it and tagged it. The evidentiary basis for this whale is, therefore, extraordinarily fragile. It consists of one unverified report and one modern report so riddled with inconsistencies as to be meaningless. In the decades since 1946, an era of widespread photography, advanced whale-watching tourism, and sophisticated scientific surveys, there have been no new, credible sightings. The 1946 event also highlights a fundamental challenge in observing marine life: the immense difficulty of accurately judging scale and distance on the open water. With no landmarks for reference, a smaller object seen up close can easily be mistaken for a much larger object farther away. It's a perceptual trap that can easily give rise to monsters, and the hopelessly broad estimates from the Annapolis Basin suggest that the observers had fallen squarely into it. With the direct evidence for the whale proving to be so flimsy, the investigation must turn to alternative explanations. The most compelling and widely accepted scientific theory posits that the legend is not about an unknown animal, but rather a misinterpretation of a very well-known one. Orcas have the highest dorsal fins of any whale or dolphin, and dorsal fins of over 6 feet are routinely observed. Add in issues with frames of reference on open water, and this provides one explanation why this legend may have flourished. A thorough investigation requires the consideration of all possibilities, even those that are remote. While the orca misidentification theory stands as the most robust explanation, it's worth exploring whether a genuine biological anomaly could account for the sightings. One possibility is that the creature was a whale with a rare genetic mutation. It's conceivable that a mutation could cause abnormal growth of the dorsal hump or the fin, creating a larger structure. While genetic mutations are a constant in nature, the scale of the required change is problematic, since it would require an extremely substantial change. To put it in context, this would be like a human having legs that are 7 feet long. It's not outside the realm of imagination, but from evidence and observation, it's just something we know doesn't happen. However, there is a related concept called atavism, which is the reappearance of a lost ancestral trait. In rare instances, modern whales have been born with small vestigial hind limbs, a throwback to their land-dwelling ancestors. The primary flaw in this theory is the lack of any fossil evidence to suggest that the ancestors of whales ever possessed such a giant dorsal structure. Atavism can only reawaken a genetic blueprint that once existed. It can't create one from scratch. That said, the fossil record is of course extremely incomplete, so it's always possible there is actually a whale ancestor out there with a high fin that science hasn't yet discovered. Others believe that the high-finned variant of the common whale we have today may have been a very rare species which was hunted to extinction. As you'll recall, the earliest sighting was in the late 17th century, which was the very dawn of modern animal science. Believers in this theory propose that Sibyl's whale may have been the last of a creature that has never been fully documented by science. Since you can't prove a negative, this really just remains a fascinating idea at this point. Putting this theory aside, perhaps the most conclusive piece of evidence against the existence of the creature comes not from what was seen, but from what was never seen. This is the argument from silence, and its source is one of the most extensive, detailed, and brutal records of human interaction with the natural world. These are the logbooks of the global whaling industry. From the 18th century through the late 20th century, commercial whaling was a massive industrial enterprise. Fleets from America, Europe, and later Asia hunted whales across every ocean on the planet, from the equator to the polar ice. Whaling vessels were floating factories and data collection centers. By law and custom, the ship's mate was required to keep a detailed daily logbook. These logs recorded the ship's position, weather conditions, and, most importantly, every whale sighted, chased, struck, and captured. They noted the species, the size, and the yield of whale oil, and every dimension of the whale itself. Despite this, not a single high-finned whale of any species was found at any point. Ultimately, the story of this high-finned creature is likely more valuable as a lesson in the process of science than as an unsolved zoological and scientific mystery. However, the legend's persistence speaks to our enduring fascination with the mysteries of the deep ocean and what creatures might be secretly lurking beneath the waves. Personally, against all the odds, I want to believe that a small population of these majestic high-finned whales roam the seas. Deep within the story of human evolution lies the puzzling question of why we're so different from our primate cousins. A bold and controversial theory offers a surprising answer. Perhaps our ancestors once called the coastal waters and rivers their home. The aquatic ape hypothesis presents a fascinating alternative to traditional evolutionary thinking. Picture this. Instead of adapting solely to life on land, our early ancestors may have spent crucial periods living in or near aquatic environments. This watery chapter in our past, the theory suggests, could explain some of humanity's most distinctive features. From our upright walk to our nearly hairless bodies and our remarkable ability to hold our breath, this theory seeks to explain it all. The story begins with Alistair Hardy, who first dared to imagine our ancestors as semi-aquatic beings. Hardy envisioned early humans wading through shallow waters, swimming across rivers, and diving beneath the surface to gather food. In his mind, this aquatic lifestyle provided the evolutionary pressure that shaped us into the unique creatures we are today. Walking upright became advantageous for navigating through water while keeping heads above the surface. The gradual loss of body hair made sense for animals spending significant time submerged. Hardy drew inspiration from nature itself. He looked at seals, otters, and other aquatic mammals in particular. He noted they share traits remarkably similar to humans that seem oddly out of place among typical land dwellers. For years, Hardy's unusual idea remained in the shadows of scientific discourse. Then came the 1970s, when Elaine Morgan breathed new life into the hypothesis. Morgan championed the theory with passionate conviction, arguing that it offered superior explanations compared to the prevailing savanna theory. This is the generally accepted idea that our ancestors evolved their distinctive traits while adapting to life on the open grasslands of East Africa. According to aquatic ape hypothesis proponents, there's a plethora of evidence to support their position. Among all land mammals, humans stand virtually alone in our near-complete hairlessness. This is a trait far more common in dolphins, whales, and other aquatic mammals. Beneath our skin lies a substantial layer of fat, serving the same insulating and buoyancy functions that keep marine mammals comfortable in their watery world. Our upright posture also takes on new meaning when viewed through an aquatic lens. Wading through water while foraging from trees hanging over rivers and shores would have made bipedalism not just useful, but essential for survival. Meanwhile, our sophisticated breath control, crucial for both speech and diving, mirrors capabilities found in marine mammals rather than our terrestrial relatives. Perhaps most intriguingly, humans possess something called the diving reflex. When submerged in water, our bodies automatically slow the heart rate and redirect blood flow. Interestingly, this is a response we share with seals and whales, but not with most land-dwelling mammals. The theory extends beyond physical adaptations to encompass diet and brain development. Proponents argue that early humans living near coastlines would have had access to seafood rich in omega-3 fatty acids. These nutrients, essential for brain growth, might explain the remarkable expansion of human intelligence compared to other primates. In this narrative, our proximity to water didn't just shape our bodies, it also transformed our minds into something more. Yet for all its compelling logic, the aquatic ape hypothesis faces fierce opposition from mainstream science. The most damning criticism centers on a glaring absence: fossil evidence. Archaeological discoveries consistently place early human ancestors in ancient forests and savannas, not along prehistoric shorelines or lake beds. Critics offer alternative explanations that keep our ancestors firmly on dry land. Bipedalism, they argue, evolved as an efficient way to traverse vast grasslands, allowing early humans to cover great distances while conserving energy. The loss of body hair becomes a cooling mechanism for surviving in hot, open environments rather than an aquatic adaptation. The scientific community raises another fundamental concern: the theory's lack of testable predictions. True scientific theories must generate hypotheses that researchers can confirm or refute through experimentation and discovery. Critics contend that the aquatic ape hypothesis primarily seeks to explain existing traits without offering concrete, verifiable predictions about what future evidence should reveal. This limitation has led many to dismiss the theory as speculative storytelling rather than rigorous science. While the aquatic explanation may seem elegantly logical, it remains trapped in the realm of what if, rather than advancing into testable scientific territory. The debate continues to ripple through evolutionary biology, with passionate advocates on both sides presenting their cases. Whether our ancestors ever truly embraced an aquatic lifestyle remains one of evolution's most captivating scientific mysteries.